Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast, where we explore our shared love for watching and discussing movies recorded in the late after-work hours, often in lieu of a good night's rest. I'm Julian.
I'm Madeline.
And I'm Emilio. The three of us are colleagues at a Midtown Manhattan music school. Yes, music is what brings us together, but movies are what keep us together, talking at the end of the night. So we've created some order to this ongoing trend by recording these conversations, considering an overarching theme while we cycle through 5 unique guidelines for engagement.
In addition to these main episodes, we record and release bonus one-off episodes as we see fit, and we plan to do more of that going forward. But while we do this, you, the listener, can count on the three of us doing what we've grown to love, foregoing sleep for a discussion about movies every other week.
And this week, we finish our current cycle of movies related to politics with a category we call Close-Up, which usually is a deeper dive into the career of a professional in the movie business. But we're going to do things a little differently this time around for this episode cycle. We won't be looking at a professional in the biz, but rather a real-life character that several different actors have portrayed on screen, and one that happens to be a major figure in 20th century American politics, and that is the 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhous Nixon.
Not this, preparation for this episode teaching me that Nixon's middle name was Milhous.
Mm-hmm. I'm not even a Simpsons fan. But
Yeah.
You get that one.
Yeah, I definitely get that one.
The only 2 Milhouses I have ever heard of.
Yeah. And before we go any further, we have to introduce our very special guest, one of our very first and probably most dedicated listeners. Welcome my dad to the podcast.
Yeah.
Woo! Hey, everybody.
I am truly delighted. I might be as excited as Madeline, to be honest.
Well, I'm excited too. Yeah.
You guys and listeners can call him Richard. And Dad, you are retired now, but for many years you taught middle school social studies, which is why we thought that you would be a great guest for this, because you have taught the youth of North Carolina about history for many years.
I gave it a shot. How much sunk in, I don't know.
Well, we know what movies we're talking about, but I don't think we've actually said aloud what they are.
We haven't.
Just
no.
yet.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first of those movies is going to be Nixon, the 1995 biopic directed by Oliver Stone, who is well-known for directing a lot of films about American history.
Anthony Hopkins portrays Nixon in that film.
Correct. Yes.
And each one of these films has a different actor portraying Nixon, which
right.
I mean, we'll get into maybe who we think did it best.
Yes. And after that, we're going to be discussing Dick from 1999. I don't have that director's name in front
Andrew
of me.
Fleming.
Thank you. That was in my mind, and I second-guessed myself.
All good.
And our Nixon in that film is Dan Hedaya.
We're also going to take a look at a film called Frost Nixon, which was released in 2008. This was directed by Ron Howard, and our Nixon in that film is played by Frank Langella.
Nixon obviously is most commonly associated with the Watergate scandal, and these films that we're going to be getting into focus on that a lot. And so we'd love for you to give us a little rundown on what is Watergate and just some of the basics that these films touch on.
We could go for hours, so I've cut it down to about a minute and a half to just give you the absolute basics, and we can get into more details later if you want. All right.
Love it.
Nixon was elected 1968. In 72, he's running for re-election, and it's a very close election in 68, and he's thinking in 72 it could also be close. Turns out it's not, but he's still running as if it is. And so he uses some things he'd done before, which was dirty tricks. And one of the dirty tricks that was done was breaking in and bugging the Democratic National Headquarters in the Watergate building. Now, we don't think Nixon really knew about that happening ahead of time, although some say he did, but I personally don't think he knew ahead of time. But the 5 burglars are arrested at the scene. They're hauled downtown to D.C., and from then on, it becomes a big cover-up in the White House. The crime that Nixon and his people in the White House committed was not so much the burglary, because Nixon wasn't involved in the burglary. It was the attempts to cover up. that include payoffs, perjury, attempts to improperly limit the investigation. But eventually the story comes out because of some newspaper reporters and TV reporters. And then one of the conspirators starts to kind of spill the whole story. That brings about hearings in the Senate and the House, including impeachment hearings. Nixon is told by his friends, his political friends, that he's going to get impeached and he's going to be convicted in the Senate. And so he's convinced to resign. And he resigns, and then within a couple of months, he is pardoned by the new president, who is Gerald Ford. So we never had a trial of Nixon, which is kind of mentioned in one of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
One of the people in one of the movies says, I want a trial of this guy, but there never was a trial. Anyway, those are the basics of Watergate.
And he was the only president to ever resign from office, right? Is that true?
Yeah, there have been other presidents impeached. Impeached just means you're basically accused. It's like an indictment.
Yeah.
Nixon's the only president who resigned.
Are there any positive things that came out of Nixon's presidency? I think that's, Watergate is this shadow that really hangs over his time as president, but his foreign policy is something that is still considered sort of like a high watermark amongst presidents.
That's the best thing he's remembered for.
Okay, yeah.
If any of y'all out there really interested, your listeners, one of the best books is called Watergate, A New History. It came out only about 2 years ago. And here's what that guy said. It's a pretty short thing. He signed the Clean Air Act. He created the Environmental Protection Agency.
That's a big one, I remember,
He signed the Occupation Safety and Health Act. He declared the war on cancer. He signed Title IX that gives women opportunities in academia and athletic playing fields. He ended the draft, which to me was a big thing because I would have been drafted. I was born in 58, so I would have been draftable fairly soon. My brother managed to escape the draft. He was old enough. He just never was drafted, just pure luck. And then he opened up China. You see, communist China was not recognized by the United States. We didn't have any diplomatic relations with them.
Right.
And Nixon thought that was nuts. And he's the one that opened up China. And then he brought about arms talks and a closer relationship with Russia. Maybe I shouldn't say closer relationship, but a less combative relationship with Russia. So he did some good things. Whether Watergate outweighs that, I would say it does, but some other people would disagree. Like Henry Kissinger, he'd say no, the foreign affairs stuff he did outweighs the damage of Watergate.
Right. I think that's what makes him such an interesting figure to look at, because his presidency does kind of feel like two sides of a coin. He was incredibly savvy, and he had the kind of moxie that is actually very helpful if you're trying to be the commander in chief, but then also kind of had this fatal flaw that there was some sort of insecurity in him, I think, that led, to his downfall. I know that the movies get into this quite a bit.
Yeah, and Dad, I wanted to ask you, you are the only person here that lived through this. So I'm sure you will be able to bring a unique perspective, but could you maybe give us just like the cliff notes of what you remember, like how old you were at that time?
Well, I was born in 58. I would have been 14. I remember Watergate. I don't remember watching the famous hearings on TV when they did like a couple hundred hours of hearings, but I do remember Watergate being a big thing. And I remember the resignation because by the time he resigned, I was older, of course, I was like 16. And I was a convinced Democratic liberal Nixon hater. So I do remember it, but I've learned more about it since then. I was a little on the young side to really absorb it and analyze it.
Yeah.
Were you a real history kid? Like, did you love history when you were younger? Yeah.
I loved history. I was politically interested because my parents weren't politically active, but they were very politically interested. We watched the news every night. We got the news magazines, and I was encouraged to read them even when I was like 10 and 11 years old.
That's awesome.
it was a big thing for me.
You hear that a lot from people, I think, of your generation, where everything that was happening with civil rights and the Vietnam War, and now everything, that was happening domestically within the government itself with Watergate and all the peripheral scandals. It was kind of an inescapable part of being an American.
And also, we didn't have the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah.
You watched the news, there's a half hour of local news, and then you watched a half hour national. So when this thing blasted onto the scene and suddenly Sam Irvin is on TV every day for 6 or 8 hours, that was a big thing because we weren't used to that. Either were my parents. They had never been exposed to that kind of in-depth, almost smothering of, a news story that just took over everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think, I'm saying, I wasn't alive then, but as in I understand. And I think that some of these points that you're making, Richard, are good explanations for why Nixon is a good film figure to focus on too. And I feel like Watergate kind of inflects Nixon's presidency with this built-in narrative structure. There's like a tragic arc that comes from it. And also, of course, as you've said, Richard, the sense that it was really inescapable news at that time to live through it.
I like your point of there being, it's like a character arc in the same way that, the first movie that we're going to talk about, Nixon, it is very long and it covers a lot of ground, and we'll get into that here in just a moment.
That's very true.
But his life is kind of designed the way that a lot of film stories are designed.
Yeah.
And that he has these highs, but then he does have this downfall.
It's Shakespearean. This is a guy he's vice president, and then his career crashes. And then he is elected in 68 and then reelected in 72. And he won 49 out of the 50 states in the Electoral College. The only state he won was Massachusetts, and he won D.C., and he got 68% of the vote. So he is way up there. No one can touch him. And then 2 years later, he's forced to resign. Even the hardcore Nixonites had gone to him and said, "You've got to resign."
Wow. Well, let's pivot. Let's get into Nixon.
The film Nixon.
The film, yes. We should say we should not confuse the film Nixon with any of the other two films that we're talking about, right? Dick or Frost Nixon. We are talking Oliver Stone's Nixon. I would say, too, although the events chronicled in this film lead to a retreat by a complicated aging man, Nixon is not to be confused with the film Knox Goes Away, 2023 film that's co-produced, directed, and stars Michael Keaton about a hitman with dementia.
I didn't know about that movie.
Yeah, it kind of came and went.
And this film Nixon, just because Oliver Stone is so well known for depicting well-known events of American history, this film should not be confused with any of his other president films, namely JFK or W.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
This film Nixon is also not to be confused with the New York Knicks. And the three of us work very close to Madison Square Garden, where the New York Knicks play.
That's right.
So
if you were to say like a first round series and we're talking about a gentleman's sweep, we might say Knicks in 5.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
and that would be confusing.
It could be very confusing.
And it should not be confused with Richard III by Shakespeare, which is also a rise and crash.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who was a more rotten person, Richard III as portrayed by Shakespeare or Nixon.
As you said,
think about it.
Quite Shakespearean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas the other films that we are discussing have quite specific conceits. Not that this doesn't, but the film Nixon, apropos of its broad title, aims to really capture the big picture of Richard Nixon and many of the people most closely associated with him. Framed by scenes within and surrounding the Watergate scandal, we see Nixon as well in his modest California upbringing, his early career successes and failures, his decades-long relationship with his wife, Pat Nixon, and of course, his 5 years in the White House amidst his, I guess you'd call them notorious cadre of cabinet members, people like Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Kissinger, and many others. Also other government operatives like J. Edgar Hoover, and in the director's cut, this CIA agent played by Sam Waterston. and other heads of state such as Mao Zedong and Leonid Brezhnev, who were in power at the same time. And along the way, motifs in the film include Nixon's memories of bygone family members, efforts to cover a gruff interior and sometimes exterior with a more pleasant facade, and a seemingly inescapable jealousy of his former rival, John F. Kennedy. What did we think of the film Nixon?
Julian, you brought up the Oliver Stone of it all.
Mm-hmm.
He's really good at giving you this panoramic view of a situation in a really cinematic way. Like, there's all those like Dutch angles that are happening, and he like intercuts a lot so that we can get in his headspace a bunch.
Yeah.
The other thing that jumped out in a big way was that Nixon feels so much like an embodiment of what Stone loves to address in his movies. This idea of like an individual that is navigating the constructs of American government and the toll that finding their way through that takes on them, like in their soul. And it's something that you see happen time and time again in his films. Like, this movie is literally about a guy who finds his place in politics, and it's like, this seems like the perfect place for him. Why does it all go so bad?
I saw it as being a kind of a psychological study more than anything. I mean, it was a historical study, but like Julian was saying, it's looking at the whole arc of his character. One of the quotations in there that I noticed, I can't give it exactly, but I think it was Pat said something like, "When are you going to take the mask off and let us see who you really are?" Something like that.
Yeah.
Nixon was very socially awkward. They say he was actually very shy. He had trouble sometimes firing people. He was scarred psychologically, and that carried over into his paranoia. He thought everyone was out to get him. And that's a lot of the way I saw the movie. It was examining how those psychological scars affected his political career and then affected the rest of us, because we were all affected by it, including y'all. You weren't alive, but you've still been affected by it.
Yeah, totally. Because the film goes all the way back to his childhood, and then it goes into some of his young adulthood as well. And then, as my dad had mentioned earlier, you see him losing his first presidential run to Kennedy.
Right.
And I think all of those events you just see carry over through the rest of the film in any of his actions.
Yeah, I think that's part of what gives it this feeling of a tragic arc, is that there's like certain kind of the moment mistakes that he makes that just haunt him forever. Like, fumbling in that debate with John F. Kennedy. But also it seems like, I think it was when he was maybe running for governor that he his campaign was failing and he rescued it with a story about his dog.
Right. Checkers.
Checkers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Checkers.
Just
old Checkers.
A quick fact question. Did he have multiple dogs named Checkers over the years?
The dog in the 60s was Sir Timahoe. He was an Irish setter. Checkers died in 1964.
Okay.
So I don't think he had multiple dogs named Checkers. I just think once the original Checkers died, he got this new dog.
I think there's a
King
quick
Timahoe.
reference in Dick, the second film, where he continues to call the dog Checkers, and somebody is like, shouldn't you call him Sir Timahoe or whatever it was?
Oh, I missed that.
I missed that
It's
too.
very quick, but I think the implication is he just calls every dog Checker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that fits in with the way he's characterized in that film.
Yeah. Is it like frantic amidst the stress of Watergate?
But also maybe not the most like natural dog owner / lover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, to your question, Julian, of who's the real Checkers? It saves him early on in his gubernatorial run. So then it kind of makes sense that he would want to hold on to that glory by continuing to have some incarnation of Checkers by his side.
Yeah.
Where it humanizes him. That's what the thing was in the governor's race. It humanized Dick Nixon, who was seen as this, I don't know, robotic guy that couldn't reach out to people. And this made him more human.
Right.
Yeah.
This particular detail brought back to mind a film that we discussed a little bit earlier in our cycle, Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd, where a character very specifically mentions, you're running for president and you own a cat. scrap that. Get a dog. My viewers prefer dogs.
Oh, yeah. And that movie would have been made and released when Nixon was vice president under Eisenhower.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm sure that they were conscious of that, Ilya Kazan and Bud Schulberg. But then, like, going back to like this view of Richard Nixon that we get in the film Nixon, I think you see not only anxious version of Nixon in this film, but you see one who is always kind of, or maybe not always, but is frequently kind of fearful.
Yeah,
who really
absolutely.
seems to be weighed upon by his surroundings, whether it be like wealthy donors or other members of his cabinet or other people within the government, more senior officials, or even his wife, Pat Nixon, too. The movie that I kept thinking of back and forth as I watched through the 3.5 hours of the Nixon director's cut, the movie I thought of the most was Oppenheimer, actually.
Oh,
Yeah, I thought about that a bit.
Yeah, because I
see
think you see J. Robert Oppenheimer portrayed, at least in Cillian Murphy's performance, very similarly as like kind of frantic the whole time and weighed upon by people, both both by underlings and overlings too.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought of, you brought up the idea of him being fearful of the donors. I clearly remember Stone shooting them from below, giving them this very menacing quality that like they're kind of towering over him, right? He's like seated, I think, on a sofa when they're having that conversation with him, like, we're going to get you Texas. We're going to get you a boatload of money. And Kennedy might not run in 64. You know, some of that I think is definitely aided, I think, also just by the directorial touches.
Yeah. And Julian, you mentioned Oppenheimer. I mean, I also thought of Oppenheimer because Tony Goldwyn, who plays Nixon's older brother, is in an Oppenheimer playing Gordon Gray.
Correct.
And I was like, where have I seen him somewhat recently? And it was Oppenheimer.
It took me a minute to recognize Tony Goldwyn at first, but because, I mean, he's a lot younger in this film, and I think I'm more used to his face as of recent times.
Yeah. My reference point for him, and dates me a little bit, is Ghost.
I've still never seen that.
Julian has not seen Ghost, Dad.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies for me.
We didn't really get to talk about Anthony Hopkins yet.
Let's get into this.
And I'd love to start with him because we'll get into more discussion about the three Nixons later. And I think they all have their high points. But I found him to be the most captivating part of this whole film.
Oh, totally.
Same here.
Great.
I thought he was fantastic.
He was great.
And I was a little bit nervous because there is something about that guy's face that when I see it, it's just like, that's Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs.
You know, and even his voice sometimes, there's just a gravitas to it that I don't assign to somebody like Nixon, right? But he is a world-class actor, and so Holmes like pulled it off in a really cool way. And the other thing that I loved about his performance, the physicality. I feel like he totally nailed like the walking and the standing and the like shiftiness very soon. I think within about 5 minutes, I was like, I'm not seeing Hannibal Lecter. I'm not seeing any of these other, characters I might associate with him. I'm seeing a guy who's doing a pretty good job pulling off Nixon.
Yeah.
Film.
And this movie like comes out in the few years after The Silence of the Lambs, when Anthony Hopkins' career has had quite a boom from that movie. And so you sort of get the sense there's like, in just reading about the fact that he even played Richard Nixon, my first thought was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, not the first person I would expect to play him, but I trust he would do a good job. And also a sense that, oh, okay, yeah, you won an Oscar, you played an iconic villain. It's a little bit like the way that they cast Bond villains now. It's kind of like, you see like Javier Bardem gets to play a Bond villain or Rami Malek gets to play a Bond villain. It's just like, you're good at doing what you do. You'd be a natural fit to play a president.
Right.
Kind of like that.
That there's something like you're one of the elite actors of this moment.
Right.
Like, let's throw this complicated character at you.
Yeah.
The part where I thought he really nailed things was before he goes to the Lincoln Memorial to meet the protesters. And that actually happened.
I was going to ask you that.
This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Before that, he really seems to be going through some soul searching about Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the Lincoln Memorial and he turns back into the socially awkward politician who can't talk to young people.
Yep.
But then he kind of, for a moment, turns back into that introspective person and he points at the statue of Lincoln. So you're seeing all the sides of him all mixed up together.
Yeah.
And then that girl, I think she feels a sympathy for him. She says, "You can't stop it, can you?"
Yeah.
Like the
It's the
system.
system.
It's the system. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was really said to him or not there, but he really did go to Lincoln Memorial
That was one of
without
the
the Secret Service knowing it.
That was one of the
Yeah.
lines that really brought back the whole Oliver Stone. One of his directives as a filmmaker and as an artist is to like shine a light on how the individual can get just suffocated having to be a part of these greater systems, to use the word from the character. Saying that, I'm not absolving him of any of the blame, but I think that the movie walks that tightrope a little bit.
Ultimately, sprawling is a good descriptor of the film, and we've gotten into that a little bit. It tries to cover a lot of ground. It goes back to his childhood and young adulthood, his early failures and successes in his political career, and his personal relationships with his family, his cabinet, and his political rivals. And these are all shown to be incredibly influential on his time in office. And a large amount of the runtime is also spent on his first term, including what he and a lot of people viewed as major accomplishments prior to the re-election, which, as my dad said, was a landslide. So my question is, does this film take on too much, or does it succeed in using his past to explain his actions in his presidency and in Watergate?
The answer I'm tempted to give to that simplistically is yes and no. Because I think I do agree with what you said earlier, Emilio, that like where the movie works, it really works. It's like it gives you a great vision of Nixon at many different times. And I think so the theatrical cut is 3 hours and 10 minutes.
That's what I saw. Yeah.
And the director's cut is 3 hours and 30 minutes. That's the same length as things like Killers of the Flower Moon from just last year. And
strap in, man.
Yeah, strap in. And I think that the experience I had of watching the movie is, I think, just cinematically, I think a lot of the individual scenes are compelling to watch, but it does get to kind of an unwieldy length after a certain amount of time. And I'm not saying that to disparage that length of movie in general. Like, I mean, Killers of the Flower Moon, that's a movie that I think totally earns its runtime. Or something like previous Scorsese films like The Irishman, or like, I mean, Oppenheimer, that is, pretty long too. I think it earns it. I do think it's a laudable effort that Oliver Stone makes to really capture as much of the man as he does, but I think he could have done that in a leaner fashion successfully still.
I've seen almost all of his films up to Nixon.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that I have gone back to probably 2 or 3 times, I am continuously blown away by, is Born on the 4th of July. One of the things that Born on the 4th of July really does is it keeps the kind of biopic nature a little more linear. And I feel like I would have liked this movie a little more if it was more linear.
Yeah.
It does jump around a little bit.
Yeah, towards the end,
By
not
design,
as much.
yeah, towards the end, not as much.
I could see what the intention was.
Yeah.
I felt like it took me out of things a little too much. I was playing catch up a lot.
No, I would agree with that. This is the first Oliver Stone film I have seen. This is not necessarily a genre that I find myself gravitating towards. I'm not opposed to maybe seeing some other Oliver Stone films. I did watch the director's cut of this from recommendation from my brother. Dad, do you know which one you watched?
We watched director's cut, the one that had the CIA scenes that were cut.
Yeah.
Did you notice in the CIA scene when they were talking to Richard Helms, they were talking about the darkness, and Richard Helms' eyes went black.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a crazy choice.
That was wacky.
Yeah.
I think the movie, like I said, was a psychological study, and that's why he went so far back and then brings it through. And I do think he went into a little bit of depth. And frankly, I think he overemphasized Nixon's darkness a bit. Nixon had a dark side, but I'm not sure. And he did have this. He had a drinking problem. He had depression. He was paranoid. But I think they emphasized that a little bit more than is maybe historically accurate. But then again, Oliver Stone probably did his research and talked to people.
And I think, the last 45 minutes to an hour where the Watergate investigation, Nixon is deep into it and he just is really spiraling. And you see a lot of the behind the scenes deep in the White House with like him and Kissinger's prayer, which is referenced, I think, in another one of the films, I think in Frost Nixon. I just think Hopkins absolutely sells that prayer scene so hard.
Yeah.
And that also actually happened.
Yeah.
Did y'all notice that for the first part of the movie, he called Pat Nixon Buddy?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then when he's pulling away from everyone, he calls her Pat. And then at the end, he's calling her Buddy again.
Yeah, it sometimes feels like he's calling her Buddy when he is trying to convince her to join his side, like when he needs something from her, even if it's just affection. When he's more emotionally distant, that's when he goes to Pat.
I liked a lot of the scenes of Richard and Pat together because you really saw she really does seem to hold a certain power over his emotional state, but also his career moves too. That was another area where I thought of Oppenheimer too, because, in that film with Emily Blunt's portrayal of Kitty Oppenheimer, you really see how significant a player she is in the arc of his life too. And that, these scenes that really seem to mostly concern the personal realm on the surface really do have major implications.
Did you guys also pick up on, as the film continues on, I assume this is Oliver Stone and the screenwriting, but he refers to himself much more often in the third person. It's like he does it occasionally throughout the film, but I feel like it really ramps up the further along the film goes.
Right. Well, and then also, he's trying to create distance from his own behavior and actions. Yeah.
I think he's looking at himself as separate, and he's almost trying to create his legacy. And he's so focused on what Nixon would do, like Nixon the presence, rather than himself, Nixon the person.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is also probably why he didn't destroy the tapes. He saw himself as a great man who was doing great things, and he needed to preserve a record for the future.
Yeah.
He admits in his memoirs that he did suggest destroying the tapes, but he was not going to destroy the ones that had to do with national security. And I'm wondering if that's because he wanted them to preserve, so 100 years from now, some historian could say, wow, what a great president this guy was.
Cherry picking the achievements, right?
Yeah. I did notice, though, I thought Dean was presented in a somewhat sympathetic light.
Yeah.
And
Can we say who Dean was? I think we mentioned his last name a couple times.
Yeah, John Dean was the counsel to the president, which is basically sort of like the president's lawyer, and he's the guy that basically ran the cover-up.
Right.
And then he eventually realized somebody's going to jail, and I don't want it to be me. And so he spills everything to the Senate committee, to the grand jury. Nixon claimed he was lying, and Nixon says, that's why I didn't destroy the tapes, because the tapes proved that Dean's lying, not me. I've read enough of the transcripts to see, I'm not sure how Nixon gets that, because it seems to support Dean's story. But he was an advisor on the film, and they don't make Dean look like a good guy, but they make him look like a guy who was sort of dragged in against his will.
Right. Like,
and my reading is this guy from the beginning said, I can really be a big man here because it's the president and he needs me, and I'm going to run this cover up.
If you
sort
want
of
to
like
think
a Michael Cohen type.
Well, I was going to say, like, if you want to think about the Nixon story in Godfather terms, that John Dean is kind of the Pentangeli of it all.
Sure.
Yeah. Except, his fate ultimately is not the same as Frank Pentangeli.
And our next film will suggest maybe an alternate motive to John Dean's change of heart.
That's true.
Before we pivot over, do we have any final words on Nixon?
Well, one little detail that I have to appreciate that was in the movie that we did, give a bit of lip service to it earlier. Towards the end of the movie, as Richard Nixon falls ill, I think it's suggested it's from the anxiety of the Watergate proceedings. There is a moment where you see Anthony Hopkins with blood in his mouth. And I just thought, like, a little nod to his Oscar-winning role right there. Nice. Yeah. I was pretty convinced of watching him as Nixon. I think, like, he really did own the role well. But for a moment, I was like, a little bit of Hannibal crept through there.
Yeah.
Well, there is one last thing I have to say. Sorvino absolutely nailed Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's
Kay
such
and
a
I
cool
were looking at each
actor.
other. It was like, what did they dug up Kissinger and
Yeah.
brought him back to life? He had the voice,
Mhm.
the makeup was perfect, the way he moved his body. Sorvino had Kissinger absolutely nailed.
100%.
Just to quickly jump off of that, like I think my and most viewers' main association with Paul Sorvino is from Goodfellas.
Yeah.
And, there's a particular way he looks in that movie. And then when Henry Kissinger came on screen in Nixon and I had read the cast and knew it was him, I was like, is that really him? Wow.
Yeah.
For sure. While we're on the topic of this first film, this is the film that really gets the most in-depth into Watergate. The next film that we're going to be talking about is very much like a comedic retelling of the events. And then our final film only touches on Watergate a bit. So, Dad, I think you had a question that I'd love for you to pose to the group.
And particularly y'all that are younger, what do you see as being the lessons of Watergate? I mean, I have my ideas, but I'd like to hear what you think the lessons of Watergate are.
Well, where I think it gets tough to draw direct lessons from it is in the sense that in the age of Trump, the way that Nixon handled Watergate almost looks honorable. That it's like in comparison to the way that Trump handled his impeachment proceedings, that Nixon is quite dignified. That he seems to have a sense of guilt and admission of wrongdoing that you would not in a million years get from Trump.
I think you might be right. There are people who say Nixon felt no remorse, but he at least pretended to be remorseful. And that's a little bit important in that we have certain social standards, things we expect the president to do and not to do. And Nixon played that game, even if he wasn't honest about it. He played the game so he could maintain the fiction that the president should be honorable. But then that makes us as voters, some would insist the president be honorable. But now, forget it.
Well, and to that point, I can kind of sense now, I think more than ever, the latent distrust that we have in politicians and that there is a lot of cynicism about the work that politicians do. Nowadays, you have to work really hard to convince people that you're coming in with the best of intentions.
Well, that reminds me of a quotation from Theodore White, who wrote a book called Breach of Faith, The Fall of Richard Nixon in 1980. And here's what he says. The true crime of Richard Nixon was simple. He destroyed the myth that binds America together. The myth was that the president stood for the law. We know he's a human being. We know he's not perfect, but he's going to try to do the best he can. And it kind of reminds me of something they said about Trump when he was elected in 2016. People said, sure, he sounds crazy, but the office will discipline him.
Right. That there are enough people around him that are going to protect what it means to be a president. I know exactly what you're getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. And forget it. It didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of confidentiality that is important in order to maintain national security. But we also want and I think deserve transparency from our politicians. And I think that we struggled with this in the time of Nixon. I think we still struggle with it now. And I don't know what the solution to it is.
Right.
That's basically what the Supreme Court said when they made Nixon give up the tapes.
Yeah.
They said, yes, there is executive privilege, and there are times when these things need to be protected. But there are other questions as well, such as equal justice, the justice system. Well, can I tell you what I think one of the big lessons is?
Yes.
Please.
One of the big lessons is that you need to have in the government, this is going to sound incredibly corny, but you need to have civil servants who are actually dedicated to the job because they take an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. In Watergate, the reason Nixon was caught, it wasn't only because of the reporters. They kind of got the word out, but it was because the guys in the Justice Department refused to stop the investigation, even when they were told to. FBI agents were told to soft pedal it. And they said, forget it. This doesn't stop with these guys that got arrested in the building. It goes beyond. We don't know how far, and we're going to keep looking. There was a special prosecutor appointed, and he had a team. His name was Archibald Cox. He gets fired, and Nixon announces that his office has been abolished. They show up the next day and say, we're not abolished because we're civil servants, and Nixon has to go through an actual process to eliminate an agency. And they kept investigating. All these people refuse to stop, even though the higher-ups are telling them to stop. And that's what eventually nailed Richard Nixon.
So these are kind of the unsung heroes of the Nixon investigation, of the Watergate investigation, because we know names like John Dean, people like that are portrayed in these films. And yes, you do get, particularly in Nixon, because it is so sprawling, you get some of the minor characters who are maybe just the worker bees. But I would love a little bit more focus on those people specifically in our media surrounding Watergate.
Sure.
And you could do a great movie about the day after the special prosecutor gets fired, and all the people working for him say, we're not going home. We haven't finished our job. We're going to keep working. And it occurred to me, and I was thinking about this the other day. I said, well, that means someone in another office said, we're going to keep cutting their checks.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the lawyers, it was other people saying, we got to keep on this thing. And they're the ones who really caught Nixon. It wasn't the reporters. They were important, but they just kind of got the ball rolling.
Right.
But people like Dean are not going to go spill to a reporter because a reporter can't give them immunity.
Sure.
They're going to spill to people like the special prosecutor who can cut them a deal. Say, you're going to jail, but it's your choice. Is it 2 years or is it 30 years?
Yeah.
You know?
Wow.
Well, if somebody wants to write the screenplay on the special prosecutor, you can hire my dad as a screenwriter, consultant.
I'll help, and get Garrett Graff, who wrote Watergate: A New History. He knows it all.
Yeah. The one that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. He really did a good job. I mean, we now know who Deep Throat was.
Or do we?
Or do we?
True.
Our next film, Dick, which was released in 1999, directed by Andrew Fleming, I believe at that point we did not know who Deep Throat was. Yeah. Right?
It was like 2008, I think, when he outed himself.
Yeah. So this film, represents a possibility. But before we get too far into it,
Dick, this is the movie we're getting into, but this is not to be confused with the film Deep Throat, which is the...
Yeah, that's true.
The porno for which Mark felt, or from which he was given a pseudonym as this covert whistleblower. But yeah, this was a film in its own right in the 70s, one that's also referenced in the film, Dick, not to be confused with.
I'd say also this is not to be confused with the delightful Hulu series Pen 15, which is another suggestive title that also happens to be a period piece that follows the lives of two impressionable young teenage girls.
And I'd also say this film is not to be confused with Dick Johnson is Dead.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever get around to seeing that?
I know of it. I have not seen it.
I don't know what this is.
I haven't seen it either. It was a film that came out a few years ago that I still haven't seen, but it continued to jump out to me because my dad was referred to as Dickie for many years, and my last name is Johnson. So every time I see that title, it hits me in a very weird way.
Right.
Yeah. It's also not to be confused with The Death of Dick Long, which is a black comedy / drama film, which is notably
drama. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Notably, it is directed by one of the two Daniels, Daniel Scheinert, who directed Swiss Army Man and Everything Everywhere All at Once. But this was a solo outing. I have not seen this film.
I have. It's an experience.
Like Swiss Army Man?
I'd say definitely closer to Swiss Army Man than Everything Everywhere All at Once. I recommend that film.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
I'll just say one more, that although one of the characters in this film says these very same words passionately in a roller rink, this movie that we're about to discuss is not to be confused with I Love Dick, which is an Amazon Prime series that stars Catherine Hahn, Griffin Dunn, and Kevin Bacon as the titular Dick. Yeah, not to be confused with.
Yep. Oh, I appreciate it.
Yeah, same.
So in the film Dick, released in 1999, it is 1972 in Washington, D.C., and the city and the country at large are buzzing about the largest political scandal to date. But our bright and sparkly protagonists, Betsy and Arlene, are less concerned about the Watergate scandal than they are on winning a date with the latest Tiger Beat heartthrob. You'd think the scandal would be on their radar a bit, since Arlene literally lives in the Watergate hotel, and they encounter none other than G. Gordon Liddy in a dark stairwell the night of the break-in. On a school field trip to the White House, Liddy IDs the girls, and they soon find themselves face-to-face with the President of the United States, Richard Nixon. In an attempt to win their favor and keep them quiet, Nixon offers them two highly prestigious positions: official White House dog walkers and secret youth advisors. And suddenly, with seemingly untethered access to the White House,
I know,
Betsy and Arlene unwittingly uncover some particularly damning evidence of the Watergate cover-up. After their fallout with the president, what are they to do? Perhaps go straight to the radical, muckraking bastards at the Washington Post.
It made me think a little bit of the movie Uncut Gems, in that movie takes place during a real-life playoff series, and it uses real-life footage and creates an alternate story that's taking place, you know, during that real thing. Hoop heads definitely know that when they watch Uncut Gems. And I particularly know it because my Chicago Bulls would have been the Philadelphia 76ers if Derrick Rose hadn't torn his ACL. So
right. And, you know, Dougie pointed out this is very Forrest Gump as well. Where,
that was the next thing I was going to say.
They're inserted into these various political events. I listened to the commentary. Dad, I know you said you listened to the commentary. And, you know, I learned some things that maybe you already knew, but from the very beginning, you know, the girls, they're on their way out of the Watergate hotel because they need to mail their submission letter to win a date with the Tiger Beat heartthrob, whose name I don't remember right now.
Bobby something or
Bobby
other.
Sherman?
Bobby Sherman.
I had a friend whose sister had a crush on Bobby Sherman.
Yeah, I think it was very of the time. But in order to get back into their residence, they tape the door. And apparently that is actually, I mean, not that it was taped by two teenage girls, but that is how the security guard discovered the burglary, is that the door had been taped.
Yeah,
open.
thank you, All the President's Men.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And like the first 5 to 10 minutes of the film Dick all are loaded with references to All the President's Men. The first shot you get of the movie as the credits are rolling is of a typewriter, which is a direct reference to All the President's Men. But then there are some lines that are uttered in the first few minutes as well. I mean, that whole scene of when they take their field trip to the White House and then have a run-in with G. Gordon Liddy, played by Harry Shearer.
Very convincingly.
Very convincingly. And he says something to the effect of, oh, you haven't spoken to me. As a matter of fact, as far as you're concerned, I don't even exist. And that's, I mean, a different character, but there's a character who Bob Woodward accosts in a courthouse at the beginning of All the President's Men who says almost exactly the same lines.
Nice.
Liddy, according to Theodore White, he describes him as a gun-loving psychopath.
Wow.
And there are all kinds of bizarre stories about weird things this guy did.
Yeah.
Well, according to this film, he's also not very observant.
No,
because,
he's not.
The way that Betsy and Arlene get their hands on the creep list.
Committee to re-elect the president, but as they convincingly say, a list of creeps too.
The list of creeps
not
is
wrong.
that it's just stuck to the bottom of his shoe.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff, the real story, was almost Laurel and Hardy meets Inspector Clouseau. They did so much stupid stuff. It's like with the tape. Of course, we now know the real story was the girls, but according to the official record, what happened was McCord taped it. The guard found it and assumed it was put from earlier in the day by some maintenance people who didn't want to keep opening the unlocked door, and took it off. McCord saw it was removed, put the tape on again. So when the guard comes by next time, he says, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. Plus, McCord put it on horizontally instead of vertically. If he put it vertically across the lock, it wouldn't have been seen. They just made all kinds of insane mistakes all through Watergate. And one of the investigators actually did say it was sometimes more like a Buster Keaton than an Al Capone.
Oh, wow.
So,
Well, I mean, we've mentioned it before in this conversation. Now that we're talking about the movie, we should mention again that our Nixon actor for this film is the great Dan Hedaya,
Yeah.
who we've discussed on the podcast before, specifically in our episode about Amy Heckerling's high school movies, because he plays Cher's father, Mel, in Clueless.
Yeah, and as I said in our Clueless episode, is I do think he's giving a very similar performance in that film, a little bit less exaggerated, but I do think he embodies this type so well.
I also felt like the characters of Betsy and Arlene reminded me a lot of Heckerling high school types.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Spicoli, the Cher Horowitz.
Yeah, Cher for
the
sure.
ones who kind of like, they seem like they're really aloof, but they're very buoyant, and they don't seem to be bogged down too heavily by like other things that might stress people out, especially as the film goes on.
And Arlene is a little bit like Rat in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah.
It was, a bit of, I mean, he gets what he wants, but he's kind of a hopeless romantic type in some ways. And, well, I think if you were to take the three actors who we're examining who played Nixon, Anthony Hopkins, Dan Hedaya, and then Frank Langella, and then just put them in a lineup and, say who looks the most like Nixon, I think Dan Hedaya wins in a landslide.
Yeah,
I
by
would
a
say so
long
too.
shot.
Yeah. Which made it a little interesting. We might talk about this later, but the fact that Dan Hedaya actually plays a character in Nixon, and there are several moments
confusing.
where you see them sort of side by side, and you're like, wait a minute. Shouldn't you be?
He plays. They changed.
Trini.
Trini's based on Bibby Rebozo.
Yeah.
Who was a close millionaire friend of Nixon's who did money raising and was charged with some crimes related to Watergate, but I think found innocent.
Got it.
So, Bibby, if you're out there, don't sue me. I just said you were found innocent.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But yes, to everyone's point, Dan Hedaya he's the closest to the dead ringer.
Yeah. And Dan Hedaya, I think in general, like I love any movie. A movie gets automatic points for me if Dan Hedaya is in it. I think he's one of the greatest curmudgeon actors that has ever been. He is playing it up comedically. You can see he's having fun with it.
Expertly. This is a film that I had seen before, and Julian, I know you had seen before.
I had, yes.
Emilio, had you seen this film?
This was my first time seeing this movie.
And Dad, this was your first time seeing this as well.
My first time, and we both loved it, Kay and I. And if I were teaching a course on Watergate and were allowed to show any movie without getting in trouble, I would start out with this one. I really would. And the reason I would is because it's a comedy or a parody. And last time I was listening, one of your guests was talking about the difference between, I think, satire and parody.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one this would be.
Right.
But because it's presented that way, it wouldn't mislead the kids. They would know this isn't technically true.
Right.
And then the unit would be about, all right, what did we see in the movie and what really happened? I just really love the way this thing presented Watergate. In some ways, it was more accurate than the other movies.
and I think the reason why the movie can get away with these kind of big humorous swings that it does is because it actually is reverent to certain facts of the Watergate scandal too. Like the 18 and a half minutes missing from the tapes.
I love that. Yeah, very specific.
Oh, yes. When Betsy bursts in and she's like, you've been talking for 18 and a half minutes.
I know.
That really got me.
Yeah.
Same. So we've said that this film, Dick, revolves around a comic portrayal of Richard Nixon, which is worth noting. This is the only of the three performances we're discussing today that really has this quality. And it's kind of in the vein of like the way you'd see a president parodied on Saturday Night Live or a show like it, where the humor stems from a mixture of generalized accuracy, but also these really over-the-top distortions of the character. In addition to their inherent power and public exposure, what about presidents makes them a good humorous target?
I think that we are obligated to make presidents humorous targets to keep them humble.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a very great, concise way of putting it.
Which seems like Nixon was a little prickly about.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
wasn't a fan of.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, actually, to that point, I pulled some quotes from a book broadly titled The Comedians. It's written by an author named Cliff Nesteroff. Highly recommended. It's a sweeping history of American comedy.
Dougie's read this as well.
This book is very frequently mentioned on WTF with Mark
Oh
Maron.
my goodness. There it is.
The book is dedicated to Mark Maron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But so, yeah, just to give a few relevant historical facts, Richard Nixon tried to get a different Dick Cavett, canceled because
I love
of
Dick Cavett.
because of presenting guests, activist guests such as Jane Fonda, Abby Hoffman, and I'm going to botch this, Dave Megiesi. These, were all people who were critical of Nixon during his administration. And then there is a dialogue here between Nixon and H.R. Haldeman. I'm not going to read it all, but it's quoted in the book, revealed from the declassified tapes. Here's one quote. "Well, is there any way we can screw him?" Speaking of Dick Cavett.
Nixon sicked the IRS on Cavett.
Mm.
The IRS actually came after him and audited also 3 members of his staff
Oh,
were
God.
audited by the IRS. And you find that all through Watergate, he would sick the IRS on people he didn't like,
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so he went after Cavett, like Julian said, he just did not like being ridiculed.
Right,
And
right.
of course, as any president would be, he was a common target for comedians during his administration. But that at one point, Groucho Marx, who was still alive at that time,
Dad's a big fan.
yeah, he
Love the Marx Brothers. Yeah.
he vocally criticized Richard Nixon by saying in an underground newspaper called Flash, "I think the only hope this country has is Nixon's assassination." And then as a result, the FBI reopened its Groucho file.
Oh, wow. Was that your Groucho Marx impersonation?
My best effort at it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You
No
did
worries.
a good
Yeah.
Nixon. I
Yeah.
thought you did when you read the Nixon thing about can we screw this guy? That was a good Nixon.
Thank you.
When they make the Special Prosecutors miniseries that we consult on, maybe you can play Nixon at that
There
point.
we go.
Okay.
It's going to take a long time to be made.
And a good wig. But like the
Or like a lack thereof, right?
Yeah.
I'm not doing away with this. I'm just
cap-
bundling it up.
A wig cap, and then a
cap.
wig.
Yeah.
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 But in addition to Groucho Marx, there was another comedian at the time named David Steinberg, who was told during one show at New York's Plaza Hotel that 2 FBI agents, or alleged FBI agents, said they had information about a death threat against him and were assigned to protect him. Turned out they were undercover Nixon operatives spying
wow.
on him.
And the death threat was from Nixon.
Yeah, the threat was
right.
from Nixon. Yeah, there's a couple others mentioned here. I mean, the Smothers Brothers were on television at that time, and they joined in on the mockery of Richard Nixon. But you get the picture from here.
Nixon would have hated SNL.
Oh yeah, and that actually emerges the year after he resigns.
Exactly.
Well, I had a little quote here that kind of relates. You mentioned the Smothers Brothers.
Yes.
They ridiculed Lyndon Baines Johnson
Mm-hmm.
terribly. They just really went after Johnson. And one day Johnson wrote them a letter, and here's what it said. It is part of the price of leadership of this great and free nation to be the target of clever satirists.
Mm.
You have given the gift of laughter to our people. May we never grow so somber or self-important that we fail to appreciate the humor in our lives.
Well,
So he actually wrote them
Going high
a
on that
thank
one.
you letter.
yeah, that's
And I've heard that for years. I checked it out, and according to Snopes, yes, it's real.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yes,
Cool.
LBJ wrote it to them because he said, yeah, it kind of drives me nuts when they make fun of me, but I'm the president. They're comedians. It's their job.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And he has literally all the power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
But then, Madeline, earlier you so eloquently put it that comedy is here to keep presidents humble. And I think that one of the things that's great about mockeries of presidents across the years is that there's a kind of, the word I want to use is an id that they can show in a president that I think a lot of presidents are loath to show themselves. That maybe it's inherently there, but they won't really own up to it. And I think that you see a bit of that in Dan Hedaya's portrayal of Richard Nixon, that there's just this over-the-top goofiness to a lot of it. And that, like, you don't see Nixon as a sympathetic character, really, in the film Dick. He's like...
He's a
Absolutely
dog
not.
kicker.
He's a dog kicker.
schmuck.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he is. There's another detail that jumped out to me. Richard, you brought up that scene where in Oliver Stone's Nixon, where he goes and he speaks to a bunch of youth.
Mhm.
In this film, he says
I know
a
what
couple
you're thinking
times, he says, "Don't worry, I got this.
Yeah, I'm with it.
I know how to speak to young people. I know how to connect with young people." I think Stone would have never gone there, you know?
Yeah.
No.
But there's a moment in that first scene with Nixon in the movie where, you know, he's basically saying to Kissinger, "I'll handle it with those two girls." But for a moment, he's talking about his own daughters, and he, for a moment, he forgets one of their names.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of move that I think you would not see Oliver Stone do, but you would see SNL do.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I think, really works so well in the film, Dick.
And one thing I was thinking about that I had seen this movie before, and then I watched it twice in the last week, once as a rewatch and then once with the commentary. And you mostly get Nixon in the first half.
Yeah.
And then they have kind of a falling out
Mm-hmm.
because they find the tape recorder. And Arlene records her profession of love for
18 and a half minutes of it.
And sings an Olivia Newton-John song. But then when they go to kind of listen back, make sure it recorded, they hear some pretty damning things. And like we said, one of those things was that he was potentially kicking Checkers, and
Who may not have actually been alive at the time depicted.
Checkers the fourth.
Yeah.
The third or fourth iteration
Yes.
of
I did have
Checkers
two.
3.
I did have two hamsters named Hamlet, which I'm sure Dad remembers, because I was very sad at losing the first one, so I just named the second one Hamlet the second. So Nixon's just going with the same concept as me at 10.
Not to be confused with the movie Hamlet 2.
Exactly.
which is also directed by Andrew Fleming.
Oh, wow.
Guys.
Didn't
all
even
connects.
realize.
So, yeah, I mean, I think they have enough, and they go to him and they say, like, you don't even like the dog. And also, people are talking about this Watergate business. And he kicks them out.
Yeah.
And then he's a little lighter, I think, in the second half of the film. Like, he's not in it quite as much.
So I got to say, that's actually one of my gripes with this movie.
Not enough Hedaya.
There's not enough Hedaya, and I feel like this movie like
slows
dragged
down.
in a weird way when the Woodward and Bernstein characters.
It slows
came
down
in.
a little bit, I think, after that kind of halfway moment.
I mean, when the radical bastards show up.
Exactly, yeah.
As good as Bruce McCulloch and Will Ferrell are as Woodward and Bernstein, I do really like them in this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
they were
movie
great.
kind of lost me actually a little bit in the
Interesting.
middle, and even I guess towards the end, it didn't quite pull me back in the way I wanted. I got to say, of the three movies we watched, this was the one that I was least interested in.
Whereas
weird,
I think this was my favorite.
It was my
There we go.
favorite
This is
too.
my
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah. All due respect to the other films, they're both great films. We haven't really said much of this yet. A lot of the supporting cast in this movie, I think, is really well placed.
Kissinger is also well done in this.
Yeah,
one.
totally.
Yeah, by Saul Rubinek, who is also in the movie Nixon
Yes,
in a small role.
The director was saying
Herb Klein.
that Saul Rubinek probably knows more about Henry Kissinger than Henry Kissinger did. And he said the same thing about Harry Shearer and G. Gordon Liddy, that even prior to this film, these two were like obsessed with the subjects that they end up portraying.
Wow.
Well, something else he talks about is how different generations got different jokes, like the plumber's van following the girls. There was also the bit, I don't know if y'all called it, when the girls are coming in and the Secret Service doesn't want to let them through, and Kissinger says, "That's okay. I'm familiar with these girls."
No,
Well,
not like
we're not familiar with them. I know them.
Right. He's
Yeah,
not the way it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because Kissinger had a real reputation as being a ladies' man,
Oh.
not a teenage girl man. But
Right.
he dated a lot of women who were glamorous women. He had this real reputation as being a ladies' man.
Got it.
And then a quick
Insane.
joke that I thought was absolutely hilarious, but I don't know if anyone else thought it was funny. Kay thought it was funny. Nixon's on the stairs, and I think it's Haldeman says to him, the attorney general wants to see you. And Nixon says, I thought I fired him.
Yes.
No,
Like,
the other
it's a
one.
different one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these jokes I get because in preparation for this, like I had just watched Nixon and I had seen this film before. I don't know that I got all of these the first time I watched the film, and I think that some of it may be generational, like you said, Dad, and like the director and screenwriter said on the commentary. But I feel like I've had a new enjoyment for this film watching it in a time when I'm paying more attention and learning more about Watergate, and having come right off of watching Nixon, I was able to pick up on a lot of these.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'll say too is I felt like this was a really fun vehicle for Michelle Williams and
Totally.
Kirsten Dunst. Like, this was totally styled for them as being star-making performances. Like, they're constantly in different outfits. Their personalities are such where it's like there is so much humor, and they deliver so many really fun lines.
And much like in Clueless, their ditziness, while it's a characteristic,
Right.
it's not all that there is to them. And
Right.
they are young. They're 15.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, for
15
sure.
is quite young to be paying attention to these big political moments, even if you are living through Watergate. But you see, I think particularly with Arlene, her really having this kind of like liberal awakening
Yes. Yeah.
throughout this entire experience. She becomes very anti-war. I think that she has a really interesting character arc.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah, and that Michelle Williams, even as she's only like 18 years old in this movie, but she's like already amazing, and
Yeah.
you know, she's become well known since then as, you know, like this Oscar nominated, you know, I think very deservingly so, actress, but I think it's all already there in this movie. And even though Kirsten Dunst, I mean, her role is played a little bit more for laughs than Arlene's role, but I think she's still like, all of her strengths are there too. But then like part of the crux of this movie is that it seems like a lot of these definitive moments, both of the Nixon presidency and in Betsy and Arlene's personal lives, don't necessarily come from like, you know, much of a grand vision of what's right and wrong. It's more just kind of out of like personal feelings in the moment.
And
that there's-
even them like them going to Woodward and Bernstein seems to be more of like them trying to get a prank. I mean, they call him, the girls call the Woodward and Bernstein from a prank, but I think the fact that they follow through with it is more out of just revenge, like wanting to seek revenge against Dick, who they know a little bit less as the president of the United States and more as like almost their ex-boss.
Yeah.
And the romance was incredibly creepy because
Oh,
she's
yeah.
15 and Nixon was like 62 years old.
Oh,
at this
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
it
I
would
do
have
like
been
that.
creepy with anybody, but someone old enough to be your great grandfather. That's just
Yeah.
But I do like the image of
Beyond
them
the pale.
spinning on the beach.
Yeah, that was
Yeah. The
him
dream.
riding in on horseback.
I think that maybe is the only time, apart from the scene when when Nixon eats the Hello Dollies, those are maybe the only two times I've seen Dan Hedaya smile.
That was the highlight of the movie for me.
Well
Was
said.
that was the
highlight.
hello?
Brownies.
Yeah, and I'm just like,
Them singing
Dolly.
Hello
yeah,
Dolly.
it was funny because I think that was the thing for me is when the movie kind of veered off from that. I'm going to say this too. You guys said that you liked the Woodward and Bernstein character. They didn't do it for me.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
I think.
were you looking for verisimilitude?
No,
or?
no. I'm not that big a fan of Will Ferrell.
Okay.
And I think this other guy who I don't...
Bruce McCullough.
Bruce McCullough, thank you,
Kids in the Hall.
which I know you guys have a relationship with. I don't really know this show.
Yeah.
It didn't do it for me.
I'm not always a Will Ferrell fan. I do like him in this. He
Yeah.
did make
Yeah.
me laugh in this more than he has made me laugh in a lot of other things, where I'm more lukewarm on him.
Yeah.
And I really like Bruce McCulloch, but I think that his is the lesser portrayal for me.
Although, I mean,
I
he's
thought it was funny
Yeah.
because I like the bickering because Woodward and Bernstein did bicker.
yeah.
And
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Because Bernstein was known as someone who stole your story.
Right.
from
Yeah,
you.
that's kind
Right.
of how he's portrayed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's accurate.
Yeah, and
Yeah, no.
supposedly, like, they had to go back and add the scene that the film starts with, where Woodward and Bernstein are being interviewed on television, because in the original cut, it was a little bit weird that you don't meet them until like halfway through the film, and you don't even see them, and they're not even really referenced in the first half.
Interesting,
So
yeah.
adding that initial scene kind of sets them up and sets up their relationship with the bickering a little bit.
There's
Yeah.
a line in the movie I want to bring up that one of their teachers said after they they told
Their
why
current
they
events.
were late to the bus, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the line was, every lie is another brick in the pathway to hell.
I wrote that one down too. Yeah.
But is that the story of Watergate? Every lie is a
And
brick in the
I
pathway to
like that.
hell?
I
Yeah.
did.
Because
Yeah.
That's
there
the
was
theme.
a point where Nixon said, if we just told the truth at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
we had just said, yes, there are guys, I didn't know about it, but yes, there are guys, and we're going to completely cooperate.
The cover-up was
Then
worse than the crime.
he said
yeah.
it would have been tough for a month, but then we would have been okay.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
probably right about that.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
one thing that I wanted to just bring back was, Dad, you had mentioned earlier that John Dean is a consultant on this film in addition to Nixon. And supposedly he was offered the opportunity to play himself and turned it down in this film. So that would have been fun.
That would
I
have
can
been-
imagine that leaning into the last line that he has where they,
Yeah.
they see him on TV. That might have been kind of strange.
Yeah.
What was the line?
He basically
he's
says again, he's like, if I stayed here any longer, I would be just as bad as him or something.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
like what Arlene says to him when the girls storm out after Nixon has chased them out of his
Right.
office and they pass John Dean.
Yes.
And they turn around and Arlene says to him, if you stay, you're just as bad as he is.
Right.
And the little like shock and sadness.
Yeah, the hands going over his mouth.
That actor, I forget who it is.
Jim Brewer.
Yeah, Jim Brewer absolutely sells that moment. I don't think that John Dean himself would have been
Right.
able to.
That's such an interesting point, though, like to hear that, because I can't imagine being somebody who actually lived this and then have to turn around and sell it as comedy.
Ben Bradley was also given the opportunity to play himself and turned it down.
Yeah,
I feel like he would have been less weird, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
and
I
he-
like the
he was-
part where Bradley keeps calling Deep Throat hand job.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah,
This is
and
good.
he was the main editor of the Washington Post at the time.
Yeah.
Right, right.
We haven't mentioned one other cast member, another significant figure in the Nixon administration, who was H.R. Haldeman, who's played by another kid in the hall, Dave Foley.
Dave Foley, who
Um,
actually
Did
got a
great
crew cut
job.
for
Did a
this.
good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, and then that scene where Betsy and Arlene raid his house near the end of the movie and come across a young Ryan Reynolds
Yeah.
in the process.
Oh, that's so weird.
First time I saw this movie was in public. It was actually at an outdoor screening at Lincoln Center this past summer. And this is like 75 minutes into the movie too. And the moment Ryan Reynolds appears, there was just a gigantic laugh washing over the crowd.
Yeah. I wasn't ready for that.
He is so baby-faced in this.
He is. This was like a very early role for him. But that scene too, where, they invade H.R. Haldeman's house to get a hold of the tapes. Dave Foley is a good example of this kind of id that you can show through comedy that you can't always show through the real news, where there's like a moment where Betsy and Arlene are running from his house and he's figured out what they've done. And he's just like, get back here, you bitches. And
He does really sell that. And that's when I
yeah.
noticed his fake teeth for the first time.
Yeah. And going back to that whole thing of id and,
That's
politics.
your third time using that word.
Well, I think it's
It's
apt.
a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
It's
use
not
it.
a criticism. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, we've mentioned that Dan Hedaya as Nixon is absent from most of the second half of the movie, but he does come back. You see like Nixon giving his I am not a crook speech and then eventually resigning. But then after he's boarded the helicopter and done that famous gesture, then the helicopter flies over DC and then Betsy and Arlene in one final move. I just love this moment where they cut up an American flag and dress up in the shreds of it, and then make a sign that he sees from the helicopter that says, "You suck, dick." And then, of course, Dan Hedaya as Nixon flips them off from the helicopter. And that's the kind of thing I feel like, at the time that this movie was made and up until the age of Trump, I feel like you would never see that from an actual president. But it's so funny to see on screen. And it's like the same reason why, to speak of a politician on the other side of the aisle, it's the same reason why it's funny to see Key and Peele show Obama and his anger translator, Luther.
Yeah. So I have two things that I want to say about the ending from the commentary. One is that supposedly the whole film is kind of built around this ending, that the ending they come up with first. And they create the rest of the film around it. And number two, that Nixon flipping them off was Dan Hedaya improving. and he didn't think that they were going to keep it in, but I think it really works.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, I really enjoyed talking about this movie, but I do think that it's after midnight and
Yeah,
we still have
it's-
one more movie
I'm-
to talk about.
Yeah, we can shift over to Frost Nixon. Yeah.
Which we should note before we get deep into this film, Frost Nixon. It's not to be confused with the British television series Quiz, which also features two actors in Frost Nixon, Michael Sheen and Matthew McFadyen, where Michael Sheen is also a television presenter.
Okay, I would like to say that Frost Nixon, not to be confused with Unfrosted, which is Jerry Seinfeld's directorial premiere that came out last
earlier,
year,
yeah.
the Pop-Tart movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, I'd say it's also not to be confused with the movie Jack Frost. Michael Keaton plays a musician dad, and with the help of a magical harmonica, comes back to life in the form of a snowman. So even though they're both in the business of show, I don't think Jack Frost is in any way related to David Frost. So maybe not even in an unlikely shared universe. But yes, do not confuse Jack Frost with Frost Nixon. Yeah.
Emilio, would you like to give us a little sense of what happens in Frost Nixon?
Yeah, so this movie takes place in the aftermath of Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974. And while America's political landscape is forever shaken, a TV personality in Australia by the name of David Frost sees a golden opportunity to get an exclusive interview with the disgraced former president and catapult his name back to relevancy amongst the media elite. His reputation as a soft reporter precedes him, however, and because of this, Nixon sees this as an opportunity to control a long-form interview in his favor and hopefully win back the trust of the American public and perhaps even make his way back to Washington. With his public perception at odds with the hard-hitting approach that he'd like to take, David Frost finds himself in contentious situations with his producer, his researchers, as well as Jack Brennan, who's one of Nixon's political aides, and Nixon himself, who quietly delights in playing mind games with the younger reporter. Does Frost have what it takes to make this more than a puff piece and deliver something to the public that the justice system could not? That's what's going on in this movie. Had you guys seen this one?
No, I had not.
Same here.
Not before.
Okay.
Had you seen this?
I had not seen it either. And I don't like always admitting this, but I think when I heard about this movie, I was like, this sounds boring as hell. Look, I love history, but there was something just about the conceit of it. I was like, okay, we're going to learn about this series of interviews.
Yeah, if you just describe the premise to someone, although I think you described it in a way that made it sound very interesting. But I think in general, if you describe the premise to somebody, they might be like, okay, and?
Yeah, I think the curb appeal on this movie is not that high. And it also didn't do very well, even though it was well received. I don't think this movie made a lot of money. But
critically, it did well, but yeah, at the box office, it was not a draw.
Well, it's funny how you mentioned a lot of the movie, or the beginning of the movie, was about Frost as this considered this lightweight, and so why does he get to interview Nixon?
Because he
That's
asked.
why I didn't watch the interviews. It was 1978.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was in college. And I remember talking to some friends. We said, we're not going to watch. It's David Frost. He's just like, we thought he was English. This English guy.
He is, yeah.
We're not going to watch this. And I wish I had. I have since watched the real ones, But yeah, I missed him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that he had to push up against a lot, is that that was everyone's perception. And I like how this film does get into the difficulties he has with selling the interview to a network.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Which is something that I think is added to the film. And from the little bit of the commentary I was able to listen to this morning, it was not in the play. They wrote it into the screenplay and then took it out and then added it back and had to film those scenes where he goes to the networks and he meets with the network executives. They filmed those in like 2 days.
Yeah, it was rushed into production. And I mean, I kept thinking of some, more recent, perhaps real life comparisons in our more recent, more polarized times, and everything just feels more extreme. And so I thought of like Logan Paul fighting Floyd Mayweather as a comparison.
Yeah.
They were like boxers.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, Nixon says that they're dueling.
Yeah.
And Frost is like, no. And Nixon's like, yeah, we are. That's what it is.
That's how it always goes.
You better be prepared.
Yeah.
When you listen to the originals, they're much more collegial with each other and more gentler in reality than it's portrayed on film. Nixon almost never raised his voice in the actual interviews.
Mhm.
Once or twice he'd say, "No, wait a minute there, hold on,"
Huh.
and that was about it.
Mhm.
And Frost always seemed to be even keeled, but he would get tough with Nixon. Like there was this one time where he recites, and it might be in the movie too, he recites 14 comments or quotations
Yeah.
Nixon made about the payoffs, and he's pretty tough in doing that. So I think Frost was tougher in reality than in the movie. And I
Mhm.
think Nixon was more collegial in reality.
Yeah, because
Mm,
the
yeah.
film portrays it as Frost struggles in the first few interviews, the ones that are not
Mhm.
meant to be about Watergate. And Nixon really has the upper hand over him and just kind of walks all over him. And then he's able to bring it back in the last interview, which is the one where they're actually allowed to talk about, like contractually allowed to talk about Watergate.
For that time, I think Frost was fairly tough, and I don't think Nixon did walk over him.
Yeah.
But the movie, I think I like the way they portrayed because it made them look like they were boxers,
Yeah.
and that Nixon became overconfident and becomes, in the end, with that phone call, he becomes a punch drunk champ who no longer really has his fight anymore.
Right, right. I have a slight quibble with how the movie tries to rally you kind of towards the end. But they kind of set it up a little bit like the judges' scorecards are like the first 9 rounds are all going to Nixon. And then the 10th round, Frost delivers a knockout punch.
Yeah.
Yeah, from what I saw watching the actual interviews, they would really spar a lot. And then at the end, it's sort of like they agreed to disagree because it was like Frost had him, and Nixon would say, "Well, you have your opinion and I have my opinion." And
Right,
then it was sort of like
right.
Frost just wanted to just move on. That's the way I saw the originals.
In the DVD bonus features, there was a brief quote from Frank Langella, who plays Nixon in Frost Nixon. Like many of the cast members, was alive at the time that these interviews were taking place and airing on television. Said that he kind of wasn't interested as he watched them. He was mostly bored because he didn't think they really were that productive throughout until Frost cornered him about Watergate. That's where he got into it, Frank Langella.
Yeah.
I think Ron Howard said something to similar effect.
Yeah, and Frank Langella and Michael Sheen originate these roles, I believe, in the play.
Yeah, which was
the
on
West End
Broadway.
play.
I think Broadway and West End.
Broadway and West End. Ron Howard goes to see this play and is just so incredibly blown back by it and wants to buy the rights. And I think he's pretty sold on the two of them playing the lead roles from the beginning.
I think it was Kevin Bacon. Didn't he say the same thing? He saw it and he was really blown away by it.
Yeah, he did say that.
Something I found weird on Wikipedia, which tends to be not fully accurate, is on the Wikipedia for this film and the Wikipedia for Nixon, both say that Warren Beatty was offered the role of Nixon. I don't think it's true for both films. That seems like a weird coincidence.
That would
Also, considering how much Beatty did not like Nixon.
Yeah, that was also surprising to me because the reasoning that was cited was that Nixon wasn't portrayed sympathetically enough in either of these films. So I'm not entirely sure what that citation was. I didn't have time to check it, but I don't think it's fully accurate.
One quick note, too, since Warren Beatty has entered the conversation, that a detail we did not mention in Dick is that towards the end of the movie, as we see this montage of Nixon resigning, that the song "You're So Vain" by Carly Simon plays there.
That's true. Yep. Listener, if you are just tuning into us for the first time, go back and listen to our conversation about Medium Cool and Shampoo, and you can hear a little bit more about Warren Beatty's political affiliations, which ran quite deep and were not in alignment with Richard Nixon very much. There was a meta angle to Frost Nixon that I was really drawn in by, which is that, there's this sit-down interview that the film is centering around was really seen as this launching pad for both Frost and Nixon through Ron Howard's direction and the screenplay, I think, are really crafting its own narrative and emotional journey for the viewer to go on. as it relates to these men and their public perception. And I'm wondering if, from your guys' perspective, if you felt like this movie was more sympathetic towards Frost or to Nixon, or if maybe those sympathies shifted in some way.
My immediate temptation is to say that it's sympathetic to both of them. I don't know if sympathetic's the only word that I would use. I mean, I think it is it's a film with two main characters, and they are both their own protagonists and then to each other antagonists. I think there's definitely this dichotomy that like Frost is the underdog and Nixon is the more seasoned fighter of the two, if you're going to continue with this boxing analogy that the film is kind of built on. But in terms of like the detail of portrayal, I do think it's pretty equal. It's more just that the adversarial element is in their nature as people.
I think I disagree. I think Frost is pretty unequivocally the protagonist of this film. And I think part of that is because we see a lot more of his backstory and a lot more of his team, as opposed to Nixon. We mostly see when he's with Frost in his interviews and in some of their conversations at Casa Pacifica. We see a couple of scenes of him that Frost is not in, but we get more, I think, from Frost and his lead up, and where like he is trying to, as you said, Emilio, fight his way back in. People didn't really see him as being the right person for the job. Right. And I think that those scenes were, as I mentioned earlier, him going and having trouble selling the interview to the networks really add to his arc.
Yeah. There's a really fun line, and it's kind of a throwaway one, where he's talking to his producer and he says, yeah, it's good for us to get out of our comfort zone. Or so I'm told. And he's kind of out of his depth. Like he had this idea and maybe he's having to figure it out on the fly.
He's scrappy.
Yeah. I kind of agree with you that I think this movie is really Frost's victory.
Yeah.
And Nixon's defeat.
I think that when Frost succeeds, the way that the film presents, nailing Nixon on Watergate, and Nixon walking out. All the other times he's exited these interviews, he's been out there like grinning, like talking to people, and shaking hands.
Maybe showing compassion to a dog.
Exactly. Patting a little dog and tugging its little ears.
Checkers 3.
Yeah, Checkers. Yep.
Yeah. And then after that last interview, he's just like sunken.
Yeah.
But it's not portrayed, I think, in a way where we're like, oh no, we feel so bad for Mr. Richard Nixon here. He's been beaten down by the big meanie Mr. Frost.
I think Nixon was portrayed as dishonest and manipulative, which might have been accurate. It's like and like you said, he was playing mind games. Like he makes the comment to him, "Did you commit?" What was the comment?
It's like, did you fornicate?
Yeah. Did you fornicate?
Did you commit?
And then it's like, and 3, 2, 1, and then
And then before the first interview, he comments on David Frost's shoes and parrots something that Kevin Bacon's character Jack Brennan had said about those shoes looking effeminate.
But then Frost brings him a pair at the very end.
Right, yeah. As his way of kind of owning him.
He also makes a comment about you need to marry that girl because she's from Monaco
and
no taxes. So he's shown as being manipulative. Now that comment about fornication, according to Frost, Nixon really said that, but in a different context.
Okay.
It was before they had started the interview, and he feels like Nixon was just trying to be one of the guys.
Right.
And he's just so bad at it.
Yeah. Socially awkward. He didn't know what else to say.
There is one little moment where they walk in and Nixon sees Caroline Cushing and Brennan goes, "Focus up." There's like, and it's very, very small. And
Stop
it's like,
being a weirdo.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really liked the writing in this movie because there were like a lot of really little details like that. I was really moved along watching the movie.
Yeah. And now that you've articulated it, Madeline, I do agree more with your point about Frost being the protagonist and Nixon the antagonist. But
I was going to say that I did say Frost was the protagonist. I don't know that Nixon is necessarily fully an antagonist in this.
Yeah,
that's the only caveat I wanted to add.
Cool. But but one point that also comes up earlier in the movie in these interviews, there is an incentive for Nixon, too, to kind of attempt to redeem his own name. Mm-hmm. It's been a few years since Watergate at the time. And the scene I'm thinking of in particular that shows the results of his decline here is when he's speaking at that convention of orthodontists. And
that is pretty pathetic.
In Houston, he's playing to a non-reactive crowd. You can see his own sense of inferiority in the situation.
Well, Nixon was broke. He had a tax bill of $500,000 because he basically cheated on his taxes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. The guy who was sicking the IRS on everybody, huh?
Yeah.
And when you say $500,000, you have to multiply that by 7 if you want to get from $1973, $74 to us. So we're looking at more like $3
Several million, yeah.
So he was basically flat broke.
Yeah.
And here's this guy from Australia offering him $655,000.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of it's just, I need some money.
I found that detail to be so set up to be like, this guy sucks. Because he was like, can we get 550? Like, he doesn't say 6.
And then
I thought that was very intentional.
And then the other guy is like,
I got you 6.
Yeah. It's kind of a power move.
If you said 5, really now it's 550. I've moved the goalposts on you.
And I think like knowing that Nixon was as broke as he was, the comments to Frost that are like, I hope you're not paying for this out of your own pocket and stuff like that feels a little charged in some way, like with jealousy.
Yeah. I do want to get to this phone call.
Yeah. We've got to talk about the phone call.
Yeah. Richard, you mentioned it earlier. Before their final interview, the consequential one about Watergate, Nixon makes a phone call to Frost at his hotel room, and he's clearly a little inebriated, a little something. It's a very revealing, very honest moment, I think, for his character. And Ron Howard has admitted that including it was total creative license, and it was loosely based on accounts that Nixon was prone to late night calls he wouldn't always remember having made. I found it really interesting because this movie does not necessarily seem interested in being about subjective storytelling. In fact, the little touches of it being sort of pseudo-documentary a la I'm Not There or like a movie like American Animals, I think makes you be like, okay, they're looking for a more objective take on this. But it's like the one super subjective moment in this movie. And considering how important it is to the film's arc, and then ultimately the very hazy note that this movie leaves you on about that phone call, I want to know, like, do we think that really happened?
In the context of the narrative?
Did it really happen? Or was it something that happened to him in his own mind? It's literally the moment where he kind of turns around and is like, I'm going to rededicate myself to this research. Reston, you go to Washington and dig through your files and get the dirt.
And then he has this kind of handed to him.
He does. And it was funny watching it in the moment. I was like, you're kind of saying the stuff that the movie was showing. The whole dynamic of like the two of them are very similar or more similar. I kind of liked that they didn't really go there and then suddenly they did. At the same time, it kind of works for me a little bit if it's meant to be in Frost's head. This is kind of a moment where he feels like, oh, I've kind of cracked into this guy. Yeah. Do we think it really happened?
I like this question because it did not even occur to me before you submitted this question that this phone call could have not happened in the narrative and that it could be in Frost's head. You know, Nixon was both in real life and probably in this film implied to be someone that struggled a lot with addiction to alcohol and like mixing with prescription medication. So it actually does feel pretty in character for Nixon. But I like the idea that it could just be in Frost's head and that he also, if it was, he was also able to play it as a manipulation of Nixon prior to the start of their last interview.
Right, because he's got those other guys hounding him to be like, man, you got to get this together. Yeah. Like, you're blowing these opportunities. And you can tell by that point, he's like, I am trying to figure out how I can be this best version of myself. And so for me, for whatever reason, it feels like this gift out of nowhere that he just gets this phone call.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm not necessarily inclined to believe that scene actually happened, but I do think it works dramatically. And I mean, this is where I sort of think the movie falls into a category of, I think we've seen a lot of movies like this in recent times of films, particularly ones from the director Pablo Larraín, who has directed films like Spencer about Princess Diana, or Jackie about Jackie Kennedy, that are not necessarily historically true, but are meant to create accurate sort of character portraits of famous historical figures.
I just want to clarify that your question is not whether or not this call happened in our reality in real life.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
but even so, it's like it does kind of help dramatically to illustrate like what we understand about the characters already, and there's sort of like what's lying in the our unconscious minds about them is brought to the fore there, and that as like characters, even if exaggerated versions of the real people, I do think that it worked for me watching it still.
Mm-hmm.
The one reason I think maybe it did happen in the arc is Nixon was always, he didn't have friends.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's seeing Frost in an odd way as being a friend, someone he can reach out to and sort of confess to a bit, particularly after he's had a little bit of bourbon and it's late at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm thinking maybe in the narrative it did happen and he doesn't remember it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I totally see that. I think it's a perfectly good read.
Well, also, fiction can sometimes communicate things that reality can't.
Yeah,
exactly.
Truths,
I'm glad you said that, Richard, because that's something in one of the DVD featurettes that Ron Howard admits to directly in making this movie, that this is a paraphrase, but he said that Frost Nixon is not a reenactment, it's a reflection, but that he thought that in it's being created, there's a greater kind of truth being achieved.
Yeah.
Which I think I was sold on that watching the movie, and I think there are a lot of movies that operate similarly and are similarly effective.
How do we feel about Frank Langella's Nixon?
Well, I remember Langella from playing Dracula.
Oh,
He did one of the Dracula, and so I kept seeing Dracula up there having mind games with David Frost in my head. It's like when y'all were saying you saw
Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal Lecter. Well, I was seeing Dracula.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think he did a good job.
I'm also familiar with Frank Langella from another political film that I really love called Dave. I thought he was fairly good. I felt a little nonplussed, I think, by his performance, and not in a bad way. If you're there and I'm not like distracted by it, it kind of means you did your job.
Yeah.
It didn't strike me on a Anthony Hopkins level of like, man, I really feel like I'm seeing somebody really embody this guy.
I think Hopkins goes for like a realism that is very convincing because he portrays it so well. Something that I think Ron Howard was kind of implying on the commentary is that Langella wasn't really trying to do a Nixon impression.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to kind of embody the soul of Nixon and be kind of a bridge between the real life Nixon and this characterization of Nixon.
Nice.
They weren't trying to make him look like Nixon. They weren't trying to make him sound like Nixon. He doesn't really.
That speaks to what you said, Richard, and what Julian, you were alluding to as well. The leaning into fiction sometimes can create a greater truth.
Yeah.
I think if Langella's Nixon had been the real Nixon, he would have gotten away with it. He was sharper. He was much more on point. His staff would have been scared to death of him because this was a much tougher, smarter Nixon than the Nixon of Watergate.
Right.
Maybe that's because this Nixon was now relaxed and rested from retirement, and the real Nixon of Watergate was worn down by the war and the protest and the civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe also kind of ready to come out of retirement a little bit. Be like, I've still got my fastball, you know?
It's interesting you mentioned that, Richard, because I mean, I think in comparison to the other performances of Nixon that we've examined in this conversation, that as we see Anthony Hopkins play him, I think that's the most vulnerable form of Nixon that we see. And then, Dan Hedaya's portrayal is comical, but he is kind of a tough guy there. And I think that Frank Langella is a bit of a mix. He's vulnerable and he's tough in varying degrees. And then to speak to the greater point, too, of just verisimilitude to real presidents, I think that, whenever you have someone portraying a president, whether it's comedically or dramatically, there's a given, I think, suspension of disbelief because presidents, their image is so public. Everyone knows what they look like. You just have to accept that the actors playing the presidents are not them to a T.
Right.
You have to accept a little bit of difference, but I think that creates an interesting situation for an actor where you can interpret the president rather than imitating them. And I think Anthony Hopkins does a great imitation, if you'd call it that, of Nixon in that film, but Frank Langella, I'd say, is more an interpretation.
I'm with that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want to go around really quickly and maybe say who was our favorite dick?
I think my least favorite is Langella. I get what he's going for. And I think that a lot of it is direction from Ron Howard, with the fact that they're not, as we were saying, they're not going for realism. But after watching these other two, even the comedic one of Dan Hedaya is closer to realism, I think, than Langella. That he's got to be number 3 for me. I think that Anthony Hopkins is so captivating. He's my number 1, but I feel like then I will go to sleep and wake up tomorrow and say Dan Hedaya is my number 1 because he's so funny.
Yeah.
And he really sells the comedic beats. So they're very different performances. I think they're actually kind of difficult to compare those two. They're both my favorite in different ways.
It's well said. But if you have to ask me just on the level of id, my favorite.
Your favorite new word.
Fourth instance, yeah.
I think I have to go with Dan Hedaya. It just like Dan Hedaya's performance of Nixon in this movie makes me think of a story I heard around the time when Trump was about to be sworn into office about a gay lookalike to Mike Pence collecting donations for Planned Parenthood. That's that's kind of how like Dan Hedaya's performance as Nixon reads to me.
Yeah.
In maybe not with the same real world benefits, but just in terms of like the spirit of the parody. I think it's very amusing to watch when you look at Hopkins and Langella, that like they're both at that point in their career lauded actors. But in Dan Hedaya's case, I mean, this guy is like truly a character actor.
Yeah.
Someone who's there for the fans sticking around, who probably, you see in Clueless or Blood Simple and things like that. You think, he looks kind of like Richard Nixon, but you don't seriously think he's going to play him. And then he does.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious.
Yeah.
There's other points in this book I referenced, the comedians that talk about the importance of the mockery of presidents and how it is an inherently, as much as it's, to a viewer, innocuous and definitely, it may be at best uproarious laugh experience, that in the real world, it is a bold move. So I think that comedy is a very valuable thing in interpreting current events or past events, as in the film Dick. And that's one of the reasons why Dan Hedaya's performance is the one that really does it for me.
So more LBJ energy, welcoming the humor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Richard, how about you? And do you have a favorite depiction?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to jump back to something Julian said about ridiculing presidents being important. It reminds me of how Charlie Chaplin took on Hitler.
The great dictator.
Yeah.
The great dictator. That all the criticisms of Hitler didn't quite stick, but then ridiculing Hitler stuck. And that's why we need to make fun of these guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite is Dan Hedaya, probably because I remember Nixon and I was not a fan at all. And so I really liked somebody basically ridiculing him.
Right.
And the movie was just charmingly fun.
Yeah.
Nice.
Emilio, how about you?
I appreciated what Dick was going for on a lot of fronts, I think. Some of the movie kind of lost me, but I would have to say the Dan Hedaya performance is probably the one. I see your points. They're quite valid. I think just watching it, though, it felt kind of one note to me. Mm-hmm. And everyone's mileage varies on that note. That note for you, Richard, is like, that spoke to a primal feeling that you had about this guy, right? For you, Julian, it's speaking to something, I want to say philosophical in some respects about like what this type of mockery can do. There were some really good laughs, but overall it like didn't quite meet what the other two did. I will probably wake up tomorrow and maybe the day after and probably say it's the Anthony Hopkins one, just because I feel like he had to be so many different versions and be in so many different places from a formal craft perspective. It was just like, man, you got to take your hat off to this guy. Like,
he's a master.
It really is. And so I think that was the one that really stuck with me. But I loved all the points we were making about finding a deeper truth by kind of mining fiction with the Frank Langella performance. I like in general the spirit of that, and I'm being sold on it more and more. So overall, I felt like they all do different things.
Yeah.
I think quite well. So
Yeah.
alrighty.
We did it.
We did it. We got through those 3 movies. Do we want to make some time for Unlikely Shared Universe?
Yes.
Richard, you're hanging in there, man, for us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Thanks for
fine.
sticking around.
Yeah.
I'm retired. I got nothing to do tomorrow. I'll just sleep in.
I could start because mine is going to use the last film that we talked about. So while it's fresh,
Yes.
David Frost. He has an unquestionable ability to connect with people on a deeply personal level. Perhaps there's a sinister reason for this, like that he has a supernatural ability to read a person's thoughts and memories with a single touch.
Oh.
How did he acquire this skill, you ask? Well, he gained supernatural powers when he was turned into a vampire in 1340 BC. So it's possible we have 2 vampires here in this interview.
Langella and
Over the past several millennia, David has led and strengthened a powerful coven of vampires called the Volturi. And craving a break from the pressure of being the most powerful vampire in the world, he takes on the alias of David and starts his foray into show business in the 1960s. Having been a powerful leader in his own right, he's interested in the story of Nixon's downfall and takes on the Frost-Nixon Project in the name of research. And despite what you may have read to the contrary, he actually exits the spotlight in the decades following these interviews and returns to his life leading the Volturi. His focus will be on gaining additional numbers, and his sights will eventually be set on a particularly strong family of vampires residing in the Pacific Northwest. However, he may find their powers too much for him and his army to handle, no matter the placement of the moon.
Wow.
You're talking about the Twilight Saga.
Yes.
No, I was completely lost. I thought she was going to put him in Staten Island.
I thought for a moment you were working towards Good Omens.
There are many different directions this could go. I was never a twihard, as they say, but I had some friends that were, and so I was familiar enough. But Michael Sheen plays a fairly powerful vampire in the Twilight film series.
Cool.
So can I go next?
Do it.
Please.
All right. As you can imagine, Nixon is worn out to the bone by Watergate. He decides he no longer wants to be Nixon. To disappear, he finds his old Secret Service body double and makes a switch. But now he needs to find a way to make a living. So he contacts an old law school acquaintance who's an eccentric millionaire with a lot of commercial interests and explains to this man, I can be your lawyer because, I'm underhanded and backstabbing. That's exactly what you need. And his friend agrees. He becomes a lawyer for this guy. Things start to fall apart when he is contacted by a distant relative of Henry Kissinger, a German doctor named Dr. Greta Pinderschloss. And she has a plot to take her son, Gordon, and put him into the family of this millionaire because this family, the millionaire, has a long-lost brother, and they're going to pass Gordon off as a long-lost brother.
Okay.
The problem they run into is that the family welcomes Gordon with open arms, and he was not used to love, so he falls in love with the family. That means that at the final showdown, when they are trying to force the millionaire to reveal the location of his secret vault that contains all the family fortune, Gordon grabs a book off the library, a magic book, opens it, and a hurricane blasts out of the book. It blows Nixon and Dr. Pinderschloss into the air. They then descend to the earth and land in 2 coffins prepared by the millionaire's precocious children. And on one coffin is the name Dr. Pinderschloss. And on the other coffin, can you tell me what the name might be?
I am stumped. Also, I'm trying to catch here. So you said it was Nixon, but I'm trying to go through my brain here. Is it?
I guess that does add an additional
wrinkle
layer of
to
difficulty.
this.
It's Dan Hedaya.
Okay, it's Dan Hedaya. Okay.
Hmm.
Oh God, is this like?
Well, I'll give you a hint. Gordon is later discovered to actually be the true lost brother, and his name is Uncle Fester.
Oh, Addams Family?
Yeah, because
There
Dan
we go.
Hedaya played the
Yep.
lawyer.
You're right.
It wasn't
You are right.
Tully Alford. That was actually Richard Nixon.
I like that. I like that. I don't know why my brain didn't go
It's
there.
because there's so many Nixons.
There are, yeah, too many Nixons. I got to say, you were setting up a bunch of little details that got me a little spooked for a second. You guys mind if I go next?
Yeah,
Go for it.
All right. So in Frost Nixon, we see Bob Zelnick. He's one of the researchers for Frost.
Mm-hmm.
He's a journalist at the top of his field. He's a man of principle and professional discipline. We also see that despite his left-leaning political views, Nixon's unplanned emotional disclosure, I love that phrase, seems to have resonated in some way with him. Let's just say that this admission about the flexibility of the law and legal fuzziness that Nixon's handling of Watergate opened up, let's just say that maybe it piqued Bob's interest in the law a little more broadly. And being the workaholic intellectual that he is, he decides to enroll in law school and start a parallel track in his life. To keep his careers and any potential conflicts of interest away from overlapping, he begins practicing law under a different name, Jeremy Green. And his straightforward, hard-nosed approach to journalism translates to law quite well. And this second revenue stream also allows him to start a skincare regimen that dramatically improves his appearance, helping him to look more youthful in the early 90s than he did in 1977. As Jeremy Green, a legal eagle alter ego. Yes, say that 5 times fast. It's as green that Bob Zelnick can live out his more scrupulous fantasies. And it's as an attorney that an old friend of Bob's named David calls him for help settling an unusual deal. You see, David and his wife Diana met a famous Playboy millionaire named John Gage in Vegas, and Gage is offered to pay the couple $1 million if he can spend a night with Diana. While Bob castigates David for negotiating a deal with a wealthy man like Gage without his guidance, he claims that for Diana, he could have gotten at least $2 million for them. He nonetheless draws up the contracts full of all kinds of impressive contingencies to protect his clients from not getting the money. Things like the John Garfield clause. Now, if you know old Hollywood lore, you might be able to guess what that refers to, but if you don't, they also make it quite clear in this movie. Do we know what movie this is?
No.
I do know the movie, but I don't know the name of it. Robert Redford's in it.
Yep, Robert Redford's in it. Woody Harrelson.
Woody Harrelson.
Demi Moore. This is Indecent Proposal.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Oliver Platt who plays Bob Zelnick
Oliver
in
Platt,
Frost Nixon.
yes, that's correct. He is maybe the funniest and best thing in Indecent Proposal. There are 2 or 3 moments in that movie that are borderline genius line readings and like setups for humor that you just do not see coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, Oliver Platt.
I think he and Sam Rockwell are both really good in Frost Nixon.
Oh, yeah,
And,
definitely.
and Matthew
No, I
McFadden.
And
Sam
Matthew
Rockwell.
McFadden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was great in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was tempted to think of a possible fate where Bob Zelnick maybe gets into being a benefactor for restaurants in Chicago, but
I was wondering if you were going to go there.
yeah, but it felt a little bit too hard to connect those threads.
I think he probably made a good amount of money from his
true.
success here.
That is true.
Yeah.
So to finish off this round of Unlikely Shared Universe, just a little disclaimer before I read through this one, that it, sort of wades into conspiracy theory territory, but remember, this is Unlikely Shared Universe. By nature,
course.
it's a stretch. So it's well established in Nixon's public narrative that his brother, Harold, died of tuberculosis when he was still young, when both of them were still young. However, what if this was just a sob story concocted by Richard Nixon for campaigning?
Alrighty.
And that the Nixon family was trying to pull government strings from very early on. So let's say that Harold Nixon faked his death with the initial intent to become a shadowy figure in the government and shifted the optics by assuming the different and relatively innocuous name Gordon Gray. With this new identity, Gray managed to successfully occupy several esteemed positions in society and government, including as a lawyer, in the military, and eventually the Psychological Strategy Board in the executive branch of the U.S. government. And from this position, Gray became a natural candidate in 1954 to head a committee appointed, perhaps in the shadows, by a newly inaugurated Vice President Richard Nixon, but on the surface by the jealous chair of the Atomic Energy Commission, Lewis Strauss, to review and ultimately reject renewal of the security clearance of the country's one-time golden boy of theoretical physics, after years of suspicion of his communist sympathies and his public humiliation of Mr. Strauss.
We alluded to this earlier. I did not mean to almost spoil your unlikely shared universe.
Oh, that's okay. I mean,
no, it's a good setup. I also love that, like, newly appointed Nixon.
Yeah,
Nixon's potential brother. Really well.
Also,
it's all happening.
Like,
I see it.
Harold Nixon, according to Wikipedia, died in 1933. And Gordon Gray, I think, entered public life in 1935. So it lines up pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Just took him a couple of years to sort of get his new identity going.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So this is Oppenheimer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very cool. My goodness. Amazing.
Oh, can I say one quick thing?
Do it quickly. Go for
it. I hate to correct a director, but the director of Dick in the commentary comments on the cutting up of the flag and says it's both unconstitutional and illegal. It is neither unconstitutional nor illegal to cut an American flag. In fact, the Supreme Court has ruled that damaging an American flag as a form of protest is First Amendment protection.
As long as you sew it back together, it's fine. Right?
I suppose it's just good for dramatic effect.
That's that too?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Okay. Any last things we want to say?
I think, I really went down. I almost felt in my own little way like either a Woodward or a Bernstein in doing the prep for this conversation over the last few weeks, because it was, logging a lot of hours of viewing time and taking a lot of notes about a lot of different things, but learning about a very consequential chapter of U.S. history in the process that I'm still intrigued by. I definitely still want to know more about. I think it's a great point of reference when you consider a lot of things in our very recent past. I feel enriched by having gone through these movies and had this discussion. Like him or not, Nixon is an undeniably fascinating figure to portray in film. And, I think there's just a lot of great testaments to why politicians, whether you consider them to be good or bad people, make for very interesting, dramatic subjects in these movies.
You kind of said it all, man.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add because timestamp it's 1:18 a.m. and I'm sleepy.
Richard, is there any last thing that you want to say to just cap off your thoughts?
The lesson of Watergate is you need people in the government, those so-called little bureaucrats who are people who are actually dedicated to the public good and are going to say, I'm going to do this job the way I'm supposed to do it because I'm dedicated to the job. I'm not going to be just a servant for whoever happens to be president for the next 4 years.
Totally.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I want to point out, you guys may not recognize, but my dad is wearing a White House sweatshirt.
I noted that earlier.
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah.
Which I know because I know that sweatshirt.
Very, very cool. Well, we appreciate, Richard, you hanging with us.
Thanks for having me. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
This was a real thrill, I gotta say, having you here. I'm sure for you too.
Yeah, Dad, this was so much fun. I really enjoyed being able to chat with you and then have you meet my podcast friends who you've heard through your
heard
speakers.
A lot about y'all from Maddie and listened to you a bunch. And Kay and I never miss the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, this ends our politics cycle.
Yeah.
It does.
We've brought it to a close here. And the next cycle we're going to do is going to be a little distinct. It's going to be a holiday season suggestion box.
Oops, all suggestion box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that. Oops, all suggestion box. Yes.
Yeah.
'Tis indeed the season for holiday-themed fare to be seen, rewatched, and enjoyed. And with that in mind, the three of us, Madeline, Julian, and myself, we're going to each suggest a film for the group to see and discuss. As per usual with our suggestion box episodes, at least one of us will be seeing these films for the very first time. And so the next time we meet, we're going to be continuing our way through the works of one of our podcast favorite, Todd Haynes, by talking what movie?
Carol.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Which
I mean,
is the one you are suggesting,
yes,
Julian.
officially, this is my suggestion of the three. And some of what's going into that is that it's been some years. I need a refresher on that movie. But, you know, if you just hear the terms Todd Haynes and holiday movie, even before you've heard the name, I'm sure you already know it's Carol.
Very cool. Yeah. And I'm going to be the one seeing it for the first time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excited to keep going on the Haynes train.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in addition to this podcast, you can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Sleepless Cinematic Pod. We put a lot of time into our TikToks. I got to say, we have a really fun time with them, though. You can also contact us via email. We would absolutely love to hear from you. You can write to us at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com.
And if you're on Letterboxd, you can follow me, Julian, at it's just my name, Julian_Barthold.
And you can follow me, Madeline, at Patroness of Cats. And Dad, I'm pretty sure you made a Letterboxd, although I don't know how active you are.
I'm completely inactive, but I need to become active because I really want to start reading y'all's stuff on there.
All right, cool.
Cool.
If you're listening to us for the first time, thank you for finding us. If this is your second or third or 20th time you've listened to us, thank you so much for sticking with us. We've really grown to love doing this, and it means the world to have our budding listenership grow.
If you haven't already, we'd ask you, return listener, to please write us a positive review and rate us on your podcast platform of choice. Short and sweet works. This is one of the best ways for new listeners to find us and help our podcast take its next steps. You can also keep it grassroots and tell a friend to tell a friend about the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast. That helps too. And now I think this is the part of the podcast where we step into the helicopter and wave our peace signs goodbye.
Good night, guys.
Doing it right now.
Yes. Good night.
We are not crooks.